Could the Chicago Bulls pull off the upset? The Chicago Bulls have been one of the more impressive teams in the NBA this season, led by DeMar DeRozen and Zach, and although they have fallen off a little bit due to injuries and some other factors, it is still pretty clear that they're a very talented team. But quickly, before we get the video started, for those of you who may not know, I'm Juicy Sports. I make opinionative NBA content, and if you guys enjoy videos similar to this, hit that subscribe button, that like button, and that post notification bell. But anyways, let's get into it.
I work with the medics. I'm about to get you injected. I got a couple connections so I can get you prosthetic.
After a relatively rough season last year, the Chicago Bulls decided not to sit on their hands and bring in some big-time players over the offseason in order to improve their roster. They were able to bring in guys like DeMar DeRozan and Lonzo Ball alongside with some others, and the expectation going into the season for the Bulls were they were going to be a better team than they were last year, and they probably were going to make the playoffs as maybe a 6th or 7th seed, but most people didn't see Chicago getting to the levels that they were playing at this season. At the beginning of the season, and honestly for the most part of the season, they were a top 3 seed in the Eastern Conference, which is absolutely phenomenal, and their main guys in DeMar and Zach were playing very well for them this season. Specifically, DeMar DeRozan was having an MVP level season. Now, I personally don't think he's going to win it, but at the same time, it doesn't mean he didn't have a phenomenal season because he clearly did. But unfortunately for Chicago, as the season progressed, they started to fall off a little bit. Now, whether that was due to injuries or just general bad play, that was kind of besides the point, and at the end of the season, Chicago was only the 6th seed in the Eastern Conference, when, as I mentioned, for the most part of the season, they were a top 3 seed. But going into the playoffs, they were then matched up against the defending champs, the Milwaukee Bucks, and after a relatively close loss in Game 1, a great win in Game 2, and a pretty big blowout loss in Game 3, the Bulls are currently down 2-1 to the Bucks with Game 4 coming up. But now the question is, could the Chicago Bulls actually come back in this series and beat the Milwaukee Bucks, or are the defending champs just a little too much for the Chicago team? So the prevailing thought about this series was the Bucks were going to win this series in probably 5, maybe 6 games. People just thought the defending champs were just going to be way too much. When you talk about who they have in Giannis, Chris Middleton, Drew Holiday, and some other nice players they have on their team, was just going to be way too much for the Chicago team. Although the Bulls had a very nice regular season, they did start to fall off, and with the injury to Lonzo Ball, people just don't think the Bulls are the same team as they were at the beginning of the year, and thought the Bucks were probably going to win this series. Now, after 3 games and after the series is 2-1 in the Bucks' direction, I think most people still have that same thought that the Bucks are probably going to win this series in 5, maybe 6 games. And if you were to ask my personal opinion, I think I would probably agree with that, but at the same time, I don't necessarily think you should count the Bulls out at this point. But if the Bulls actually want to be competitive and even win this series, there's a few major things that they really need to do for the rest of the series. The main thing that they really need to focus on is their main 2 guys in DeMar DeRozan and Zach need to play at a very high level for every single game of the rest of the series. When you talk about their performances in Game 3, both of them had very poor performances, DeMar only having 11 points on 4 of 9 shooting, and LaVine only having 15 points on 6 of 13 shooting. That's just completely unacceptable, and these guys need to play at a much higher level than they did in Game 3. And if they were to play at that same level, the Bucks would completely wipe the Bulls every single game, and in blowout wins as well. Those 2 guys need to play at a very high level. And even besides the points that these guys would put up, they also need to play a great all-around game in terms of their passing and playmaking, as well as playing great team defense, rebounding the ball effectively. It's a lot more than just scoring for these guys. But of course, when it does come down to it and their team needs them to score the basketball, they need to do so at a pretty high level, and especially do so effectively in the clutch if it were to be a close game. But if both of their main guys were able to play effectively for the rest of the series, I think they would have a much better chance of winning the series, and the Bulls would be very difficult to beat at that point. But there still are some other factors that I think the Chicago Bulls need to focus on. Now, the next factor is obvious and something every team in the NBA has to do in order to win, but that would be to play great team defense. Now, Chicago during the regular season was known as a pretty good defensive team, but once it comes down to the playoffs, obviously it's a completely different ballgame. The main focus of the Bulls defensively is obviously supposed to be on Giannis, and although in Game 3 Giannis didn't necessarily go off, he only put up 18 points, he didn't necessarily need to, as the Bucks were able to win in a blowout victory. But the great thing about Giannis, and and what makes it more difficult for Chicago to actually guard him is not only is he very prolific in terms of scoring, but he's also a very prolific passer and playmaker as well, and just making his teammates' lives a lot easier. So what that means is not only does Chicago need to send double and even triple teams and really put up that wall whenever Giannis drives all the way to the basket, but they also need to do a good job at getting to those wide open shooters when they do double or triple team Giannis. And basically what that means is every single player on the court needs to do their job and play great team defense overall. But obviously the Bucks were the defending champs for a reason. They have some other really nice players. They have Drew Holiday, who was very prolific in the playoff run last year, and even this year obviously he's a very talented player offensively. Unfortunately for them, they don't have Chris Middleton, who is usually the second-hand man next to Giannis, but they do have a guy in Bobby Portis who clearly has a capability of going off in certain games. Grayson Allen is also a decent player offensively, I would say, coming off the bench, and he clearly has the ability to go off in certain games, as he did go off in game 3, putting up 22 points. But really, besides specific individual players, the Bucks just play very well as a unit overall, and even when Giannis isn't on the court, they do a great job at either keeping the lead or extending the lead, and they're just a very well coached and just play very well as a unit. So the Bulls really need to do a good job at not relaxing once Giannis does come off the court, and just continue to play 48 minutes of great team defense. Now, of course, this does sound obvious, but the next factor that the Bulls really need to focus on is getting some help from their bench unit. It's been pretty clear that their bench unit has not played well whatsoever in this series, and even if a guy like DeMar and Zach are absolutely going off, if their bench is giving them absolutely nothing, it's still going to be relatively difficult to win that game, although they were able to do so in game 2. But that was a close game, and you also have to consider DeMar put up 41 points, and how many times is he going to do that in this series? So if Chicago's bench could just give them a little bit, that would be a huge help to those main two guys, and if they play well and their main two guys play well, I think they have a pretty good chance at winning whatever specific game that happens in, and if they're able to do that for an entire playoff series or the rest of this series, I think they have a decent chance at coming back and winning the series at that point, but that is a big if, because so far their bench unit has not played well whatsoever. Now obviously they're not getting many minutes, but that's to be expected in a playoff setting, but a guy like Kobe White really needs to play how he did in game 1 for the rest of the series, or basically the most part of the rest of the series. And off the bench, the Bulls don't necessarily have all that many scoring options, but whatever they do have and the other players that are coming off the bench need to hit those wide open catch and shoot 3-point jump shots once they get them, or if they get some layups or dunks, if they need to convert, as well as play great team defense as well, obviously. Basically, everybody needs to do their job for the rest of the series. But of course, as I mentioned, if Chicago is able to do all those things that I mentioned effectively, of course they're going to have a chance to come back and win this series. But if they're not able to do that effectively, I think it's pretty clear the Bucks probably will win this series. But whatever happens going forward, I'm still very bullish on the Bulls going forward and think they have a great future. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think Chicago still has a chance in this series, or do you think the series is over? But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy, check one of these 2 videos popping up now. And until the next time, peace out, guys.
Oh yeah, I work with the medics. I'm about to get you injected. I got a couple connections so I can get you prosthetic. Hope you can't go